Hello, welcome to the MuseScore Café. Today is Wednesday, September 18th, 2019, and my name is Marc Sabatella, the Director of Education for MuseScore, and this is my weekly series of chats where I show off something about MuseScore or talk about music making in general or whatever I feel like talking about, and it's a live chat for people who are participating live. You can ask me questions and comments and so forth. Otherwise, I know a lot of people watch after the fact, but I definitely encourage people tuning in live. It's always this same time, which is basically 12:30 Eastern time in the U.S., which translates to either 16:30 or I think 17:30 GMT, depending on where we're at seasonally. The whole daylight savings time shift. Okay, so the topic that I have chosen to talk about today, and I'm always open to questions on any topic, is to talk about MuseScore 3.3, the beta version that we just released yesterday. So we had an initial beta release a couple weeks ago. There was a kind of a problem with it that made me not really want to talk about it a whole lot then, because it was crashing a little too much. But we got that crash fixed right away. So now there's an updated beta that's also got some other improvements and things. And so I just want to talk about what's in this 3.3 beta. And I like talking about the betas because we do this for a reason, because we want people to try this stuff out and give us their feedback. And, if there's bugs, we want to know about them. Or if there's stuff that isn't quite working the way you would want or you're confused about, we want to know about things like that. So I'm going to show some of the new features, some of the things that have changed in it. So the main thing, since I still have my screen reader on.
Score no selection.
There we go. So you may recall a few weeks ago I did a session with my student Elizabeth in which I was showing her some accessibility features in MuseScore. Most of the work that I did leading up to my meeting with her and the changes, the further improvements that I made, based on our interaction there and in the work that we've now done in the last few weeks. School started, we're in classes. Most of these changes are in MuseScore 3.3 beta. So if you install the beta, and I should have that page.
HTTPS.
Let me get that page.
Live dashboard YouTube Google Chrome. Live no next frame.
So you're hearing NVDA screen reader reading everything I say. I'm going to turn it off in a little bit, but I'm going to have it on just so you can get a sense of what this accessibility business is about.
Download. Clickable list with 3 items. Software visited. Clickable main landmark mute.
So here is the article,
selection.
And the download links are here for the different versions. So I'm going to copy. And while NVDA is running,
cut control.
I can't trust my shortcuts because NVDA ends up stealing a lot of my shortcuts.
MuseScore 3. HTTPS.
Yep. So here we go. I do a stream. There you go. It's every week. I've been doing this for actually a little over a year now. So there's a whole archive full of these things. So have a ball. So this is where you download MuseScore 3.3 beta, and the big thing is the palettes. But I'm going to show you the bit about the accessibility first, just so that I will turn off the screen reader. It reads stuff in your score.
Note E4 quarter measure 1 beat 1 staff 1 violin I.
Right, and then as I cursor
dynamic F beat 1.
As I cursor through the score.
Tempo 1 SR movement allegro beat 1. Rest 8th beat 3 dynamic P. Dynamic P beat 3.
Right, so it's reading all the information about the score as I move through it. And this has been a feature for a while, but we've been constantly improving how this works, streamlining it, making the information better, getting it so that you can access more of the information. Like, for instance,
bar line normal bar line beat 1.
I've just hit home to go to the beginning. If I now hit Alt left,
vertical frame title string quartet number 5 in a major composer Ludwig van Beethoven, 1770 1827, subtitle Opus 18, number 5.
There you go. So it reads the contents of text frames and so forth. It read just you heard it reading the dynamics. It reads pretty much everything, and we've made a lot of commands accessible that weren't before. You know, things that you can do by keyboard that you previously couldn't, and just a whole lot about this is working. And yeah, it's been great. Elizabeth has been able to complete her assignments. She's been able to read the assignments.
String Quartet 18 5-star.
Okay, I'm gonna
not
quiet. Okay, it's as I put together handouts, she's able to read the handouts, and then when there's assignments, she's been able to complete the assignments, and it's been great. So 3.3 beta 2 is now the first release that has all of this in and working to the point where we can actually say, if you are a blind user, you have some hope of actually being able to create scores pretty reasonably. So that's pretty huge. So the reading, the NVDA is a separate program that knows how to read things that are on the screen. And so when I click the E, you can see down here, oops, the status bar displays a lot of text. The screen reader is basically reading that text, although we actually process this text before giving it to the screen reader, so it doesn't necessarily read all of, it is a little smarter about what it reads.
Duration, quarter, voice, 1, measure, 1,
interesting.
1, staff 1, violin I.
Apparently if I move my cursor over the status bar, it actually reads that literally. I didn't even know that. So anyhow, yeah, screen readers that's how blind people deal with computers, is having the screen reader read what's on the screen. And screen readers are great at reading things like menus and dialog boxes that are text-based, but they don't inherently know how to read music. You have to tell the screen reader how to read the music, and so that's what we have been working on, is improving our communication with the screen reader. And one of the things that was never accessible before were the palettes. You could read scores well, and you could add notes to scores, but you couldn't add any of the markings that required use of the palettes, because there was no way to access the palette without using the mouse. And that has always been a limitation of MuseScore. With MuseScore 3, we sort of added a way that you could access the palettes without the mouse by using the search facility to search for particular palette elements, but it was sort of hidden. People didn't know that it was there, and it didn't work as well as it really needed to anyhow. And there were other problems. The screen reader stopped working with some other things. So anyhow, a lot of things went wrong that we needed to sort of regroup and get them to working. And 3.3 gets them working, and a big part of what 3.3 did, so we made all these accessibility improvements, but as part of what that involves is the palettes are completely redesigned now in a way that is keyboard accessible. That is not the reason why they were completely designed. That's just a side benefit. So I'm going to switch gears here. And I'm going to just turn NVDA off.
Exit NVDA dialog. What would OK button?
There we go. All right, so now NVDA is off so that we won't be hearing it read. And now I can just talk about the palettes and what's different about them. So the idea with the palettes, yes, they're keyboard accessible now, which is great. In fact, let me just show you a little what that looks like. So I'll use Control-Alt-P is a shortcut I set up. It's by default, there's not a shortcut to get to the palette. You'd have to click to get there, but that's fine. But now I can hit Tab, and it'll start moving through the palettes. I'm hitting up arrow here, and you can see, right, it's on key signatures. Boy, I miss the screen reader now. It would be reading all this if it were still on. But you can see from the highlighting that it's going through the palettes. If I want to, time signatures, okay. Oops, back up there. I forget exactly how. Oh, I think I need to use Tab within here. Yeah, Tab 4-4. And then I can enter something from the palette, and there you see my score now just changed to 4-4. So I was able to do all of that just by using Tab, the cursor keys, and hitting Enter. So that's a nice thing about the palette, sure. But again, this is not the primary reason why the palettes were redesigned. The palettes were redesigned to make them easier to organize, make them more customizable, and just generally easier to deal with in a number of ways. So let me show you what some of these are. So really, one of the changes you'll see now is that clicking a palette no longer opens and closes it immediately. You need to use the little arrow next to it. I've got mixed feelings about that. We're, looking to see if maybe there's ways we can do that, change this around. But the reason for this is it's important to be able to then navigate. So it's important that clicking a palette has the ability to select it without opening it, but maybe we'll make double click open it or something like that. In a lot of respects, things look more or less the way they looked before. And we also still have the ability to have a single palette option here. I right click on the palettes there and I can have single palette option. And with the single palette option now, when I open one palette, the others close. And I was one of the people who was like really insisting that we needed to add that back because the first beta didn't have it. But I'm starting to realize now why it maybe wasn't such a bad thing to not have it. So a lot of things are similar, but a lot of things are different, and the things that are different mostly have to do with customization. So, for instance, I've been creating all these handouts, and these handouts that I've created, like here's one I just created on Circle of Fifths, and I use a lot of frames, like these horizontal frames that you see here, that I've hidden. And I've also, let me turn on the display of the frames again, show frames, now all the frames show up, and if I turn on the unprintable things, you'll see all the breaks, the section breaks that I put in. So if you hit play, it'll pause here. So so it's hopefully a little clearer, a little cleaner, but the layout is pretty similar. But check this out. Like I'm using a lot of clef changes, you can see, and I'm adding frames and I'm adding breaks. And that's the main thing I'm using the palettes for. All this other stuff in the palettes I wasn't using on this project. So what if I just took the breaks and just moved it? Boom. Take the frames and measures, whoops, and move it. And I also do some playing with bar lines. I've always thought bar lines should be up here with all the rest of the clefs and keys and time signatures. So you can just drag palettes around now. And also, I've never loved the idea that we have this breaks and spacers palette and a separate frames and measures palette. I mean, I get what they are. I mean, I implemented a lot of this stuff or helped implement a lot of it. But at some level, the function of these things, of adding breaks versus adding spacers versus adding frames, there's a lot of overlap in these things. I sometimes wish there was just a palette called page layout that had all of those things, and also, for that matter, had this guy, the staff type change that was added for MuseScore 3. So what if I wanted a palette that just had those things on it? Well, I can do that. Let's add a palette. And it used to be, to customize palettes, you had to like create a custom workspace, and there was all this extra steps you had to do. No longer the case. There's just a big old add palettes button. And I can now create a custom palette. And there's my custom palette. I could rename it palette properties, I guess. There might be some other way to do it. I'll call it page layout. And now I can just move things into this palette. I'll add my breaks. I'll add my breaks. And then I'm going to maybe add my frames. These are showing up bigger because they're inherently different sizes on the different palettes here, but I'm going to resize them in a second. And then maybe I'll add my spacers. And let's bring in this guy here. Now, am I going to drag this up here? Is it going to? Yeah, so let me close these two guys. That's why I like the single palette mode often, because it's easier to see everything at once. All right, so now I've got my page layout palette that's got everything I need in it for page layouty sorts of things. Yeah, so there you go. It used to be possible to rearrange palettes, but in MuseScore 3, in the original MuseScore 3, or in MuseScore 2 for that matter, to rearrange palettes was much more complicated affair. You had to right click on the palette, and then there was a move up, and it would move it up one notch. So if you wanted to move a palette all the way up from the bottom to the top, that was a whole lot of clicking, to get a palette. And now it's just drag it there. So these icons are different sizes, but I think I can go to the palette cell properties here and tell it to scale it down. Let's see, 0.5. I have to play with how that works, because these cells, I think the deal is that these icons are just different sizes than those icons. Anyhow, I haven't played with everything in here, but I'm surprised actually that it's not scaling, but maybe I have to do everything on this column before. Nope. So anyhow, I'm still learning my way around some of this stuff. There's also the palette properties here where I set the overall width and height of each cell. So, I could make the whole cell wider. And now the cells are wider, right? So, I mean, all those customizations were present before as well. But I don't like that, so I'm going to go back where I was. It was 64. Okay, so you can add items to palettes that easily. You can also add items from your score. This was also possible before. Now you can't just drag into the palette, because as soon as you drag elements, it really thinks you're just trying to drag it on the score. Give me one moment right here. Yes?
I forgot my long.
Oh, okay, go on. I'm doing a live stream here, so you're on the air. Okay, this is the room where I teach in. So, single note crescendos. Yes, single note crescendo is definitely a thing in MuseScore 3. So, for instance, MuseScore 3 the original MuseScore 3 that came out in December did not have single note crescendos, but they were added at 3.1, I want to say. Now, it won't work for piano because piano is not capable of that. But for flute, let's check it out. I'll add a whole note, and then I will add a crescendo. And I think it won't necessarily play this by default because there's no dynamics to tell it how much to crescendo, but let's see. Right, no, none. But if I go in here and I put in a dynamic marking, where are my dynamic markings? If I add a dynamic marking to the measure before, I didn't need that, I want a double P. And then maybe the measure after, I'll make it fortissimo to make it really clear. Here we go, ready? There you go. So single note dynamics, definitely a thing. So also then, like these dynamics, there's like a whole lot of dynamics on here. And that's great that they're all there, but maybe you don't really need that many dynamics. I hardly ever use most of these. I only use a few of them. So we've always had the idea, well, for a long time, for many years, we've had a basic and an advanced workspace. But the basic to me was always too limited, yet advanced has got too much stuff on it. Well, what I'm finding now is maybe I like basic. Really, maybe basic is all I need. So I'm going to switch to the basic workspace, which takes a second. But watch what happens now with the basic workspace. So it's got fewer things on it, and if I go to the dynamics palette, it's only got a few things. Well, maybe that's all I need. Well, say I have a need for one of the others, like SFZ. Boy, I really need sforzando. I just hit the more button there, and boy, here's some more choices. And then I can just add my SFZ. And probably, realistically, none of these others do I care about. So I'm done. I'll hit more again, and now I've got a basic palette with SFZ in it. And look how easy that was. So you could really get away with starting with that basic palette and then a basic workspace and just add to it as necessary, and maybe find your life is a little easier than having the advanced palette all the time. Now if I go back to the advanced palette, I kind of want to get my custom palette and then see if I can bring my custom palette over into the, so what happened is my custom palette that I just got created is not present anymore, and I think I know why. I think what happened is it's not advanced, it's one of these that says advanced edited. And apparently I've done this a couple different times because I'm still experimenting. And so I've created a couple different advanced edited palettes. But here's the one with page layout on it. If I come here, I think maybe, I guess there's not a way to save palettes anymore. I delete palette. I was hoping maybe for, it used to be in previous releases, you could then save a palette and then load it into a different workspace, and I'm not seeing a way to do that right now. So that might be something we need to request to make sure that it can happen before the release. But it also would be really easy for me to just delete the palettes that I don't want. Like for instance, I don't use fretboard diagrams, so I could easily just say, you know what, let's just hide this palette. Boom, he's gone. Now I don't have to look that one. You know what, I don't use alternate note heads often enough to care about, so I'm just going to hide that palette, because I can also set different note heads using the inspector. And for percussion music, yeah, alternate note heads are used all the time, but we don't need the palette for that. So I can't even remember the last time I used that palette. So now, I can just come through and clean things up. Ooh, and now that I created my page layout palette, I don't need either of these guys anymore, right? So I can hide this one. I wonder if I can just press it and hit delete. Yep, there you go. So that was even easier. The accidentals palette, I don't use this accidentals palette because everything I need is here on the toolbar, or there's keyboard shortcuts for. All right, I guess these brackets are marginally useful, but I could think about whether I need them, because if I delete it, I'll delete it. If I ever want it back, I can say add palettes, and there it is. It's ready to be added back again. So accidentals added, yay. And it looks like it put them right back where they were. So the palettes were redesigned in this way to be really easy to customize in a way that isn't just like for advanced usage anymore, but now is really something that we are hoping becomes sort of a part of how people go about using MuseScore to really get things working for them, to start simple and add what you need. I created this page layout palette that's got like symbols that came from 3 different palettes and all combined onto one. I could also just create a project palette. Like if there's one particular project I'm using where I'm using certain dynamics and certain articulations over and over again, I could create a palette just for that project and has just the articulations and the dynamics that are being used in that project. I mean, dynamics are dynamics. I probably wouldn't do that just for that, but there's probably like certain things, like if you're writing for strings, you're going to see a lot of up bows and down bows, but if you're not writing for strings, you're never going to see up bows and down bows. So, maybe I want a string articulation palette just for that purpose, and then maybe I hide the regular articulations palette, or just don't bother opening it. All sorts of things like that. Or text, like maybe if I'm writing for jazz, I'm using certain text like swing and mute and whatever more often than others, and for other pieces it might be other things. So so can you order these alphabetically? So this comes up often, and the answer is yes, you can order them however you want now that we can easily do this. Now the next question is, can you do it automatically? No. Could that be some command that gets added in the future? Sure, it could be added in the future. I can tell you why we don't do it by default. There's a couple reasons we don't do it by default. One is translation. These are the names in English, but they're actually not even all English, because some of these have different names in depending on whether you're using US English or UK English. Certain words like measure is measure in US, but it's bar in Great Britain, and staff versus stave, and some other things like that are different. But also just in other languages, these names would be totally different, so that the order would be different. And there's something very logical and useful, like right now, think about how often we use key signatures and time signatures and clefs kind of together, because we're setting stuff up at the beginning of a score. Or if you're starting a new movement, chances are you're going to change all of things. And like I said, bar lines also I tend to use in the same way. So there's some advantages to having clefs, key signatures, time signatures, and bar lines all together, and yet they're not in alphabetical order. So that's why we don't have them that way by default. But by gosh, if you want them that way, you can now have them that way without a whole lot of fuss. I'm sitting here talking while I'm rearranging these things, and I'm almost done, right? Articulations. Here we go. So I personally wouldn't want to work that way. I would prefer to be able to go back so I could just switch back to the regular advanced workspace. But this could be my advanced alphabetic workspace. So you can, every time you rearrange things, it's going to create this like edited workspace for you. But you can also just create one yourself and give it a name. Like I can call this one alphabetic. And now this is my alphabetic workspace, right? Page layout, I'll move that where it belongs in the alphabet. So then if I go back to my advanced workspace, it's back to the default for how advanced workspace looks. So anyhow, those are some of the customizations, some of the things that you can be doing to kind of customize the palette. So some of this stuff is still in flux as far as how this works. So yeah, insert new palette. I guess that's when I did the add palettes that added to the beginning. But what if I know I want something here right above the N? I could say insert new palette, and it inserts my new palette right there. So that's good to know that that's an option. What else is in here? Oh, reset the palette. So if I've made changes, the other thing is just rearranging the things on the palette. Like let's go to articulations. If I go here and maybe there's certain things that I use a lot and they're kind of hard for me to find because these fermatas, I never use any of these fermatas. So I'm going to select them all, delete, boom, they're gone. I don't have to look at all those silly fermatas I never use. I love it. Okay, these guys here, the up bow and down bow, if you're writing for string music, they're pretty common, way more common than a lot of these other things here. So I kind of feel like I want to get them somewhere more useful for me. Other people might never use those because they don't write for strings. Well, that's fine. Maybe use the guitar bend more often. That's all up to you. I also tend to use this guy often enough that I think I want to see it a little more prominent. These three, I don't even know what the heck these are. Oh, staccato, okay, whatever. I get rid of these things, and I don't mind getting rid of them because I know if I want them back, I just hit more, and there's all the stuff I got rid of. So, we used to have that master palette where these things were, you could get to from a menu and have to find them and all, but now everything is just right in front of you. So, yeah, I've only been playing with these palettes for a little bit, but I'm really liking how easy all of this stuff is and how much it just really encourages me to work this way. This is another staccatissimo that I never use, but I feel like this is possible that I would use it at some point, so I might put it here. Although these bow markings I'm still going to use more, I'm sure. Anyhow, these are all this other crap. I never use this stuff. What am I doing still looking at them? None of those. Bye. I'll use these guys. And yeah, the basic workspace has a limited set, but it's not my limited set. Like, I don't know that it's got this guy, but I use this guy, right? I don't use this guy. This guy's not even a thing. Bye. Yeah, I'm having fun with this now. Oh, okay. I didn't even know that. I didn't know we had that there. I'll have to play with that some and see if that's how I want it to be. But for now, I'm just going to move him down here. This is for a let ring indication. Does that work? So if I click a note and then put the let ring indication on it, okay, that doesn't display how I would want it. I think it's supposed to come off to the side a little bit. So anyhow, but the symbol is there. So anyhow, palette rearranging, it's one feature, and you might think of it as a small customization feature, but I think it could really fundamentally change the experience of working with MuseScore and how pleasant it is. And I will say that when I was working with creating some of these handouts, and I started messing with creating with like, all I did was take my frames and measures and the breaks and spacers palettes and move them up to the top here. And then suddenly all the palettes that I needed were right here. And then I didn't mind having them open all the time. I said I was a big fan of the single palette option because I don't like having to scroll the palettes. And when I had one palette that I wanted up towards the top and one towards the bottom and then one towards the middle, then I would constantly have to scroll to get where I wanted. But I don't have to scroll anymore. I can just keep those 3 palettes open. I could keep frames and measures and all the ones that I was using in creating these handouts, the clefs palette, the frames and measures, the breaks and spacers. And boy, that clefs palette, here's another one that's got a lot of crap I don't use, right? I do not use most of these palettes. This guy, gone. This guy, gone. These 2 are real, but at least this one and this one, but not this one and not that one. So goodbye. Right, this guy, gone. This guy, gone. I think what's happened now is I've created yet another edited advanced palette. So I need to like regroup and create a workspace to do all my work in. Otherwise, I'm going to have all these extra little advanced edited palettes or workspaces. But anyhow, I can make my life so much more pleasant by arranging things how I want, and then I don't have to worry about whether the palettes are automatically closing or not, because I just have the ones I want open, and they only have what I want open. They only have what I want on them, and I can see them all at once. So anyhow, as I said, I think this is really going to kind of fundamentally improve people's usage experience with MuseScore once you really wrap your brain around the how much your workflow can be improved from this. To say nothing of the fact that keyboard accessibility is now possible also. Eventually, we would love to be able to get keyboard shortcuts in for these things, that you could define a shortcut for this particular articulation. There's already a number of them. Accent Above has a shortcut. It's Shift V, right? Shift. If I click a note, Shift V puts in an accent. But yeah, you can't currently define shortcuts for every single palette item. But now with this new palette implementation, we're hoping that that's something that's relatively then easy to add in the future. Okay, so I spent a lot of time talking about the palettes because really it's the main big new thing. And even though it's a small thing, it's a big thing. So I do want to talk about what some of the other things are, and a couple of them are things that I worked on. So I didn't really work on this palette business other than having contributed a little bit to some of the accessibility business with it, improving the keyboard navigation. Oh, I put this guy on, but I didn't mean it. And the custom ones, normally when you delete a palette, it just went into that hidden list, so that when you hit add palettes, it's there to come back. But the custom ones, the ones you create yourself, well, those you can just delete permanently, and now they're gone. And so when I hit add palettes, you won't see that custom palette being waited to be added back. Okay, so some of the other features are things that I've also talked about in the Café before, but are in the release now, or in MuseScore 3.3 beta. So one of them is Roman numeral analysis. If I want to do Roman numeral analysis, I can now do add text Roman numeral analysis. And now I can type 164 and boom, I have 164, and I can hit space to move to the next note. All the same shortcuts that exist for chord symbols to navigate, space to move to the next note, tab to move to the next measure, shift space to move backwards by note, semicolon to move a beat at a time. There's all these shortcuts that have always existed for chord symbols. They continue to exist for Roman numeral analysis. So I type 5-7, I get that. I type maybe 7 diminished, I get that. What else you want to see? Half diminished, right? Maybe 2, and I'm going to use 0 is the shortcut for half diminished. So all of this is using a font that I developed called Campania, which just immediately translates your keystrokes to things. Like when I typed, like notice here, if I type a 6, I just get a regular full-size 6, or a 4, I get a regular full-size 4, because that's not what a Roman numeral looks like. But if I type a 1 first, then a 6, it superscripts the 6 and superscripts the 4. So it knows the syntax of Roman numerals, and I'm sure there's some details that are, could be improved, and as I get comments from people on it, I've made some of the improvements. Right now, though, there's no outstanding complaints against it, because not that many people are using it, only a handful, since I put this version of it out there a few months ago. But now that it's going to be part of MuseScore and part of this Roman numeral analysis feature, I expect many more people are going to be using it, and I'll probably get more feedback of, when I type this thing goes wrong, and it should do that other thing instead. Flats, B for flat, so flat 5, 7, and so forth, or the number sign for sharp. And I did that again. I went to add text Roman numeral analysis. But if you do this a lot, then maybe instead of having to go to the menus, you'll want a keyboard shortcut for that. Well, there is the facility under Edit, Preferences, Shortcuts, to define shortcuts for pretty much any menu command, not for palette items, again, but for most of the menu commands and other things. So Roman. So add Roman numeral analysis. I know Control R is already taken, but maybe I'll make it be, is Shift R taken? Huh. Do I want Shift R? Sure, why not? Shift R. So Shift R is now my shortcut for adding Roman numeral analysis. Hello. Okay, so if I now do this and Shift R, I can type my analysis. There we go. So Roman numeral analysis is now a thing. And another thing is Nashville notation. Now, Nashville notation is like regular chord symbols. So here are chord symbols. In Nashville notation, though, we use numbers, just like we do with Roman numeral analysis, except they're not Roman numerals. We just use regular Arabic numerals. So in Nashville notation, add text, and again, I could define a shortcut for this if I used a lot. I can say add Nashville number. And now again, the same shortcuts are going to exist for moving around, but I can just type numbers. So there's the 1 chord, and then I have my 5 chord, or maybe the 5 as a dominant 7th chord. And here, it's not using a special font. My special font superscripted the 7 immediately. That's how Campania works for Roman numeral analysis. The Nashville notation actually piggybacks off of chord symbols, and so it uses more of the chord symbol representation, and so and that's for various reasons, but one of them is playback. I've showed you the work in progress on chord symbol playback. That's not in MuseScore 3.3, but it hopefully will be in another release coming soon, maybe 3.4 or something. And so Nashville notation is piggybacking off a lot more of the internals of chord symbols, so that they will play back as well. So there you have it. It's you just enter those numbers, and again, space to move to the next note. I'm not really conversant in this, but I think M is one of the ways you do minor. Oh, 1, yeah, it's because I've entered a 1, and it's not 1, it's 1 minor. There we go. I've stopped Roman numeral 1, it's Arabic 1. So there's how Nashville notation works. So that's another improvement, and the other improvement has to do with chord symbols. You saw when I entered that C7, it's displaying as C7, and if I enter C7 flat 9 using a B for the 9, it does turn the B into a flat sign. We've always had a jazz style for chord symbols that I could go to Format, Style, Chord Symbols. And if I pick the jazz style, you see it changes to a handwritten font and superscripts the 7 and does some other formatting kinds of things. But that was the only way to get formatting, was to use the jazz style with the handwritten font. Well, we got a lot of people saying, well, I really want the formatting, but I don't want to use the jazz font. Well, now we have all these settings for this. So this extension is, so basically in C7 flat 9, 7, the first number you see after the root is the extension, and then everything after that is modifier. Those are the terms that we're using here. So this number here controls the scaling of that. If I want that 7 smaller, Now it's smaller. And then the vertical offset is vertical offset. So a negative number will move it up. So now it's up. That's probably too small. Probably, I find a good thing is probably about 0.8 or 0.9 even, but I'll say 0.8 to make it more clear. 0.8 for the scaling. And then the modifiers, I will want at least that small and at least as high. But, you know, I could have it identical like that, but I could push the modifier up a little higher and I can make it maybe a touch smaller or more than a touch smaller, right? I can, so those are some of the settings now that exist for chord symbols. And they also affect Nashville notation also. Nashville did the superscripting by default because it's kind of necessary, right? Otherwise you just see 57. Chord symbols, C7 on the same, on one line is a thing. Not everyone superscripts their chord symbols, but everyone superscripts Nashville. So Nashville superscripts by default, but then that that dialog lets you control how much additional superscripting there might be above and beyond that. So normally you wouldn't have both Nashville numbers and chord symbols in the same score, but you would have chord symbols and Roman numeral analysis in the same score because, well, that's a pretty common thing to want to do, creating like educational materials and so forth. So those are some of the new features. That's actually most of the new features because it's really just about the palettes was a lot of work. I mean, to redo these palettes entirely. And so if you don't have to take advantage of that customization, and then it's just moderate, you know, slightly different. You click the side here instead of the palette name to open it, and maybe we'll figure out a way around that before release. But the palettes was a lot of work to redesign it, and that work was done by Dmitry, one of the people who's working full-time on MuseScore over in Russia, but it was by the design of the palettes was due to the work of a guy named Martin, who goes by the internet handle Tentacruel. I don't know if that's how you're supposed to say it, but he's the one who produced this famous video, or series of videos, on critiquing the user interface of different programs. And so he did a critique of MuseScore that's, I will say, entertaining. He designs his...
Basically, this has over 1,200 MIDI files that can help you make chord progression.
Okay,
so for example, if you look here, they've got every single scale there is. So
his videos tend to be very opinionated, very fast-paced.
Is that a tick box with a reset button beside it? So if I tick it, I can now have a second way to untick it? Is this really necessary?
Okay, so that's a good a good summary of the feedback we get from Martin. But Martin totally redesigned how our, you know, he came up with this plan for how we should reorganize how the palettes work to be better from a user interface perspective. Let's see, so user interface review from Tentacruel. There you go. You can watch that sometime. So we took a lot of his ideas from the video to heart and made a lot of changes over the last few releases based on his suggestions. But eventually, some of the people in charge of MuseScore just hired him basically to do some design work. So he designed these palettes, palette improvements for us, and then Dmitry actually did the implementation on it. So I mean, I say hired, I mean, I don't actually know what the arrangement is, but, you know, he did that specifically because that was something that we worked out for him to do for us. MuseScore is actively looking at feedback from users, but especially users who have a lot of insight and are able to then sort of not just complain, but also are able to put forth really good concrete suggestions. They often get, you know, taken seriously. So I wanted to just go back to the page on the MuseScore 3 beta and just check. So the original MuseScore 3 beta page here, I wanted to make sure, because I feel like there was one other thing I wanted to highlight. palettes is a big one. Chord symbol formatting, Roman numeral, Nashville. Yeah, lots of little things. Plugins actually is not little. I'll talk more about the plugin improvements when we have a few more plugins that are, take advantage of. But basically, we've been gradually improving the capabilities of the plugin framework so that it's possible to write more and more sophisticated plugins that do some pretty cool things. And so I'll be showing some of those off in the future. When MuseScore 3 first came out, the plugin framework was more limited than MuseScore 2. We've pretty much fixed all the limitations, but also added a lot more also. So plugins are going to become an increasingly useful thing. And also one of the projects done for Google Summer of Code this summer, in addition to the chord symbol playback, another one of the projects was about creating like a plugin store, an easier way to download and install plugins, kind of like how we have this extension manager where you can install things like the MuseScore drumline extension, if you've ever seen that. I demonstrated that once too. Okay, all right, so I've, as usual, just sort of talked and tried to answer questions when I saw them. So I don't see any further questions at the moment. If you got any, now's your time, because I think I'm getting ready to sign off. I don't have a particular idea of what I'm going to talk about next week. So I don't know if I'll be ready to talk about plugins yet, because I think there's still work that's still happening. It might be a couple more weeks before I talk about plugins, but that will be a thing. I'll show off some more plugins, some of the new plugin capabilities. Yeah, if you've got ideas, got things that you want to hear me talk about, I will entertain suggestions. But that said, then I will talk to you next week, and hope you have a great week. And definitely go download, install this MuseScore 3.3 beta. I gave you the link already. Let me make sure it's there. Where's my thing? Yeah, the link here to download the beta 2, because we want your feedback, and we want you to then go to the forums, and or if you see outright bugs, use help. I should show you how to do the feedback. So under the help menu, you'll see ask for help and report a bug and feedback. I can tell you, report a bug goes to the bug tracker system. Ask for help is probably the most relevant way to do things, because even if you think it's a bug, it might not be, or it might have already been reported. So I would use the ask for help, and it's going to automatically go to the MuseScore support forum. On MuseScore.org, it's support forums. That's where it's going to go. And so that's a place you can go then to either ask for help or just generally ask questions. Or if you go to MuseScore.org and just go support forum, you'll see there's a whole series of forums, but in particular the one that says support. If you go here, then you can see all the discussions that already exist. Did I click? Maybe not well enough. You can see all the discussions that exist, and see if there's anyone already talking about the thing you're interested in. There is also a button here that's for feedback, and this submits a form that goes to certain people, one of whom is not me. That's all I can tell you. So I know this feedback gets looked at, and eventually people post. The people who do have access to it will sometimes summarize the feedback they've gotten and post it to the forums, so the rest of us developers can see it. So by all means, use the feedback form if that's more comfortable for you. But I will say a more direct line to more people is to use the forum, because there's many more people who see it. So anyhow, please, I encourage you to try out this beta and give us feedback on these palettes. It will take a little getting used to really get a sense of it's so different how this customization works, but it really is designed to be easy, and so easy that we want it to be inviting. Even people who weren't previously customizing palettes, we want them to start and think that they hopefully will start, because it'll hopefully be just easier to see how. So again, I will then sign off and catch you all next week. Have a great week. Bye.